This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello and welcome back to North Pod. It's another week of the off season. We've had another round of finals footy. We know who the preliminary finalists are now. So, yeah, getting close to the end of the year. Only 3 matches left. And yeah, I mean, it's heating up for the other teams, and I mean, for us, it's heating up in terms of what's gonna happen in the off season. So in terms of this episode, I'm gonna catch us up on the best and fairest, a couple of little news items. We'll quickly chat about the AFLW, and then we'll jump into the second half of our player review, going from Ben Mackay through to Jack Marnie. Obviously plenty of post-season content still in store. Thanks for tuning back and listening. I know it's probably some people going, gee, it's the end of the season. I'm happy to tune out from North Melbourne for a little while. I really appreciate you people who are still giving it a listen, who are, I guess, excited about the off season, because I think in many ways the best time to be excited about the footy is the off season, because at least everyone thinks they're a chance at this point, and you can have some theoretical wins. You can get some theoretical big trades happening, and it's funny how some players just seem to really become superstars or near superstars in the off season when they're talking about potential trades. Anyway, enough about that. We'll get into the trade season stuff very shortly. Best and fairest was on the weekend, and no surprises with the top 3, Sheasel, Larkey and Scott. And they finished in that order. Sheasel had 197 votes, Larkey 173, Scott 140. So I think most people were predicting that those would be in the top 3, and in the end it was a pretty comfortable win for Sheasel. So just caps off another fantastic achievement for Shees, and he's won everything that he could have this year at the moment, short of the Brownlow, which is going to be pretty hard to do given the team won 3 matches. But yeah, I think he was a long way ahead, and then Larkey obviously finished the year well and closed the gap a little, but ultimately it's wasn't really close. LDU and Zeeble with 131 and 112 votes round out the top 5. So LDU getting there with the amount of games played. I think he played 14, was pretty remarkable. And then obviously Zeeble was relatively consistent throughout the year, and although he had some sub roles late in the year, was still an important player, obviously. And then the rest of the top 10, Taron Thomas, Ben Mackay, Cam Zurhaar, Liam Shields, and Jai Simpkins. So, you can just see essentially if you played a lot of games and you were relatively consistent, you made the top 10. I mean, even Taron, similar to LDU, didn't play a heap of footy, but the footy that he did play was fantastic. And the others, Mackay, Zurhaar, Shields, Simpkin, played most of the year and weren't too bad. So that's the top 10 there. I think the fact that Taron Thomas and LDU were up there and didn't play the whole year kind of gives you a bit of excitement about what they could do if they were to play a whole season. But at the same time, I think it's also a bit of an indictment on the rest of the list, particularly that Sheasel was able to win by so much. I mean, he's a first-year player and he was fantastic, but the fact that he was so far ahead of everyone else does speak to the lack of quality that we actually have. And I think, as North fans, we watch the guys play each week, and you develop an affinity for some of them, and you develop a bit of a pet peeve for some of the other ones. But ultimately, I think you actually do have to watch other games of footy sometimes to realise, what a good side looks like, because we've just had an average football team for the last couple of years, and I think we're starting to see some signs with some really young talent like Sheasel and Wardlaw, obviously, from this year. But hopefully in future years we have a bit more of a competitive best and fairest, I guess, because if a first year is smashing it, whilst that's fantastic for the future, it doesn't speak well to the rest of the list. Hopefully with the best and fairest or the Sid Barker over, we should be hearing about some delistings or list changes in the near future. I'd expect, like, who knows, by the time you're listening to this, maybe even there's a couple out. I wouldn't expect us to just cut everyone straight away. I think we'll be waiting to see what happens in the trade period as to how many picks we're taking to the draft and what kind of mature age players we're able to get in. But there's a couple that I'd expect we could probably just delist pretty quickly, I would have thought. And then the only other piece of news from the week, if you're a listener to Gettable, which is one of the AFL podcasts, Kallan Dawson has allegedly got a 1-year deal, so hopefully he gets a chance to show if he's up to it at AFL level next year. I think it makes sense given, I feel like I say it every podcast, but with Mackay being most likely on the way out, Logue missing most of the year, I think it makes sense that we need a bit of backline security. So even if Kallan Dawson doesn't end up being the player that we hope or we want him to be, we're going to need some tall backs next year. So sounds like he's got the year based on that one game he played at the end of last year, and with Zeeble also coming out of the defence, there's going to be spots that we need to fill. So yeah, I think that makes sense that we give Kallan Dawson the 1-year deal. That's the only AFL men's news. And then, the women the AFLW played a fantastic game on Friday evening. It was a 5 o'clock-ish start. They tried to get the game out of the way before the men's semi-final, obviously. And we were a slow start against Geelong. I thought watching it that we were really struggling just to get the ball into our forward line. Having watched the previous 2 matches, it was a stark difference because in those matches the ball had really tended to live in our forward line, but we were really struggling to get it there. Sheila was a laid out, so we were down one of our key tools, and it was a bit of a slog. I don't think we scored a goal for the first half, but second half we were really able to get on top, kick a couple of goals, kick 4 or 5 in a row, and get on top of Geelong, which was great. So we've retained our winning streak for the start of the year. Still on top of the ladder with a really strong percentage, so a really fantastic start for the girls. Jazzy Garney kicked a goal on the run from 50 that, wouldn't have been out of place in any AFL match. She had another fantastic game. Riddell racked it up. Yeah, there was some fantastic play in the second half in particular, which enabled us to get the 9 or 10 point win. So the girls keep rolling on. I think they've got Brisbane this week, another Sunday game. So hopefully we can retain or keep that winning streak going. I think Brisbane's 2-1, so they're going to be a decent side. So another challenge, but it's been a fantastic start to the year. So certainly looking like we're heading towards finals. I know there's a few people saying that we're really in that premiership race along with Melbourne. I don't want to speak too soon, but it certainly looks like we're finals bound because, in this 10-week season, if you've got 3 wins on the board already, you're a really strong chance to be playing finals. So the girls are looking good. Before I jump into the second half of the player review, just a really quick reminder, if you could share me out with any North Melbourne fans help me spread the word. Subscribe on your chosen podcast service and leave me a review if you can, and get involved with my social media, mostly X at NorthPod Show, but I'm also on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and so on. So if you listened to last week's episode, you know how this is going to go. We're looking at the second half of the list now, so a lot of those best 22 players are going to be in this group because jumper numbers 23 through to 1, so Ben Mackay through to Jack Marnie. Every player is getting a score out of 10. There is some consideration for VFL form. 5 is a pass mark and nothing more, and I'm trying my best to make it expectation list and just look at how their season went, but there's always a bit of what we needed from a certain player and whether or not they were meeting those needs. Development's taken into account, regression is taken into account, and like I said last week, it's just from the outside. I don't claim to have any inside information, so sometimes these players are doing specific roles that the team's asking of them, and we're not to know that from the outside, so I can only comment on that. But yeah, it's going to seem like quite a harsh list, I think, just because I'm not, it's not one of those lists where a 7 is bad. You can get a 6 or a 7, and that means you had a decent year. But 5 is our pass mark. So let's get into it. We've got 23 players to get through, and I'm going to try and make it a little quicker than last week. Ben Mackay, 23. Started the year with the injury, missed the first 4 games, and then played every game after that. Had 19 games, averaged 12.2 disposals, 4.4 spoils, 6 marks. 3.8 of those were intercept marks, which is elite for a defender. Actually, the second most games he's played in a season ever for us, the 19 games, because 2021 he played 22 games. That was the most. 2022 he only played 15, and 2020 he only played 11, and that was really when he solidified his spot in the side. So, yeah, he had a relatively consistent year. I thought he started slowly just adjusting to new defensive game plan, because we saw a few of those times where he just wasn't making the right decision, and sides were getting out the back really, really smashing us. But yeah, after that was pretty reliable and had some patches of some really fantastic defensive work. Yeah, it was interesting to see his year, because I think a lot of the talk around his year was just around the fact that he's leaving. So, and we all were expecting him to do that, but I think it kind of overshadowed the fact that he had a pretty solid year. And as I said, aside from a couple of poor choices when he was figuring out how to play our new game style, I thought he was pretty good. I mean, yeah, we're all expecting him to leave. It could come in any day now when he announces the fact that he's testing for agency, but I just think it's important for us, although I think some North fans are really excited about the potential of that top 5 draft pick as compensation. 26-year-old key defenders don't grow on trees. He's played 71 games. He's found consistency over the last couple of years, and he's going to be a fantastic asset wherever he plays next year. So it is going to be a backward step for our defence as a whole, having him come out. I think it's just what we can do in terms of replacing him, because, yeah, his intercepting capabilities are, they're really hard to find. So in terms of his year, I've given him a 6. Slow start, but without him this year, we would have really copped some significant hidings. And whilst we copped a few of them this year, it would have been more. And I think it's going to take some replacing in the short term. It's going to hurt. But yeah, a 6 for Ben. I think potentially the talk of him leaving, the guessing around that maybe impacted him mentally a little bit this year, but still a solid year from Ben, and nothing to complain about. 22, Toddy Goldstein. Really interesting one to evaluate. Wasn't selected for round 1, and then Tristan Jerry got injured in that round 1 game, so he came straight back in and ended up playing 20 games for the year, got him through to game 300, and he's now on 9,837 career hitouts. So only 163 off that big 10K, which when we had Glenn on mid-year, he was pretty excited about the thought of Goldie hitting 10,000 hitouts. Rucked really well early in the year, but sort of faded a bit later in the year, seemed to get a bit tired, and particularly when he was having to play with Cherry, Goldie's never been the sort of ruckman that likes sharing it. He's sort of similar to Max Gawn. He really runs the game out and runs the other ruckman into the ground. And having to split the role with Cherry, I don't think works super well for Goldie. He much prefers to play 90% and have that sort of Coleman Jones or Comben that can give him a chop out. Averaged 13 disposals, 3.7 clearances, 29.3 hitouts, 9.8 of those were to advantage, 2.3 marks, just the 4 goals for the year, so wasn't able to impact as much forward as we would like him to. Certainly took several key intercept marks deep in defence. I think he was pretty good at that this year, and dropping back and taking a couple of important marks, but you would love him to be able to impact a little bit more forward. He's still the best ruckman on our list, but at times this year he did look past it, or that he's at least fading. So, yeah, a really interesting one to evaluate. I think you can sort of see at 35 or 36 that, he doesn't have much left in his body. I think we'd be silly to offer him more than 1 year. So, word is that Essendon's offering him 2, and I think if Essendon want to offer him 2 years and we only want to offer him 1 and he wants to take the 2 years, then fair enough. I was sort of thinking about Drew Petrie and the fact that he went on and played a year at West Coast, and I don't think his year at West Coast has made anyone think any less of Drew Petrie as a North Melbourne player, and I think we need to think the same way with Goldie. We'd love him to stay if he's going to play on, but also we'd love to have a ruckman that's replacing him, I suppose. So a 5 for Goldie. Started the year with promise, wasn't able to have that impact around the ground later in the year, and splitting the ruck duties has never been a strength of his. And yeah, if he has played his last game in North Colours, it's been an absolute pleasure to watch him. He's essentially been our number one ruck since 2009, so 14 years with him dominating the ruck, and it was a solid year for him. A bit of a pass mark, but nothing more. Callum Coleman Jones. What promised as a year to sort of consolidate his spot in the side ended up having another injury-riddled year. Second year on the list. It's his 6th year in the system, so we need to start seeing something from him. He's only played 28 games, which is somewhat hard to believe. Started the year injured. I think it was a toe or a foot. Came back in round 7 and got concussed straight away against Melbourne. Then returned and played rounds 10 through 18 before getting another concussion and sitting out the rest of the 6 weeks that were remaining. I thought he played 3 really solid games in that Sydney, Collingwood, Essendon patch where the rest of the side was also playing really well. He marked it. He was hitting the scoreboard. He kicked across those games. He marked it 15 times, kicked 4 goals. But then he didn't kick a goal in his other 6 games and really struggled to get into the right positions to mark it consistently. I thought for a big man, he was tackling well. 2.6 per game, and his limited runs in the ruck were okay, but nothing to get excited about or suggest that he could be a Goldie replacement. So I gave him a 4. I think those 3 promising games were fantastic, but injury and form mean it's still a bit of a fail for the year. He wasn't able to get on the park as much as we would have wanted him to, so hoping to see him develop some game sense and bring others into the game like he was able to do a bit this year. He had 4 goal assists, and I think I'd love to see him doing a little bit more of that, and obviously, staying fit, which is a little bit out of his control and a little bit in his control. So a 4 for Coleman Jones. Nick Larkey. This is an easy one. I mean, what more can be said? Kicked 71 goals, so 3.1 per game. Averaged 4.2 marks, 2.8 of those inside 50. 71% goal accuracy. I mean, the man kicked nearly 30% of our goals for the year. I think it was 29.8 or something. So really dominated our scoring. Won his first All-Australian. And it was a breakout year for him. His last 2 years have been fantastic as well, with 38 and 42 goals. The 71's obviously a massive improvement. And the fact that he was able to do this being double and triple teamed at times due to the lack of other marking forwards in the side is just remarkable. I could gush about Larkey for a long time. The Carlton game in round 3 or 4, that was the only game where he was goalless. And then he had some massive bagged kicked 9 against the Suns, 2 bags of 6, 2 bags of 5. So I think as the year went on, he was starting to get a bit more respect from the umpires and won a couple of free kicks. So he had 29 free kicks for the year. And I think, there was some frustrations earlier in the year where he was just getting monstered and getting nothing for it. And I think that was starting to change. The other thing about his game was that I really saw him developing some leadership and some fantastic media skills this year, which, just adds another string to his bow. I think he's definitely a potential leader of the club, and the way that he speaks he's just a fantastic speaker. So fantastic year from Larkey. It has to be a 10. Really a perfect year under the circumstances. And all we can hope for is that he gets a bit more support, and that allows us as a team to have more success, even if that means that maybe he's not kicking as many goals, but the variety of options is opening stuff up for us as a team. So 10 from Larkey. He could not have done any more this year under the circumstances. Griffin Logue, number 19. So the recruit from Freo, obviously a fantastic start to the year. Played 15 games and was exactly the sort of support that we needed. We got him along with Darcy Tucker through the assistance package that we got from the AFL last year, where we got some draft picks that we had to trade. And then, yeah, obviously went down with the ACL injury, really unfortunately. I think long term we've seen that he can replace Mackay. I'm not trying to say that they're exactly the same type of player, but we need a defensive player to replace Mackay, and I think Logue is that. Ideally, we'd love to be able to play both of them the same side, but that's not looking likely, obviously. I like that he's got some offensive side to his game. He's not just a Dow defender. I think that's something that he brings that Mackay didn't necessarily. He has that ability to go for a run and hit a target or chain up a bit with handballs. Yeah, it was a really solid performance. Averaged 12.5 disposals, 5 spoils, 2.4 intercept marks per game. Looked really settled, and I think, yeah, he's going to be really missed next season. Maybe he returns late in the year. It's always hard to say with ACLs because you want to be, you don't want them to do it again, so you want to be a bit precautious. We'll see. I wouldn't rush him back. Nothing's going to happen for us next year if we're really short on defenders. We're really short on defenders because, yeah, I mean, we're not playing finals. I gave him a 6. He was certainly on track for a 7 or an 8 before his injury. I thought he delivered on everything we wanted to get out of him, and yeah, he's a great age, 25, so he's got plenty of good footy ahead of him, and yeah, it was a fantastic season for Griff up until the point where he got injured. Number 18, Huey Greenwood. Another really interesting one to evaluate. So 14 games, all of his career averages were down, but he did spend some time either as the sub or playing forward as opposed to the middle of the ground where he's played most of his footy. I do think this year is a bit of a victim of his age because, I think he is a first 23 player for us at the moment, particularly given the drop-off that Cunner's had this year. But because we were trying to play youth, I think he found himself on the outer. When he did play, he was a fantastic contested ball player and still loved tackling. But yeah, I do think he would have played more footy if we were at a different age profile or a different place. At 31, he's not past it, but you do get the sense that he's going to be that depth player going into next year, and maybe he'll play a similar kind of number of games. And it's important to have players like him and Liam Shields around the younger players, particularly if they're playing well. I think that's the key. Greenwood and Shields can't just get a game because they're senior players. They also need to be, doing their part and some. If he's able to play forward and mark it, that'd be a huge plus. He's a big midfielder at 190, so it does give him a bit of flexibility, but he only kicked the 3 goals this year, so I don't think we want to get carried away with his forward line craft. That's not his strength, but I think it is something that he could potentially move into if we need. So yeah, I gave him a 4. I think he was just more a victim of opportunity this year than anything else. He had some great games and he deserved more, but the directive definitely seemed to be play the kids where possible, and that had him missing out and playing some VFL footy where, generally speaking, he dominated. And yeah, he was pivotal in that patch in the middle of the year against the Swans and the Pies and the Dons when we were competitive. He was part of that push. So a 4, but really only a fail based on the impact that he was able to have across the whole season. Number 17, Lockie Young. Just the 4 late games after 20 and 15 the previous 2 seasons, you could sense that either Clarko's not a fan of Lockie Young or he's just on the outer. I did think that I'd seen a bit from him in 2022, but yeah, he was out of favour this year and really didn't make an impact at AFL or VFL level. And it's difficult based off how he played this year to mount a case for him to get another contract. I think we've got other options that at that medium rebounding defender kind of player, and yeah, he's 24. He's played 47 games. It's hard to see him improving much beyond where he's at. This was his 5th year on an AFL list, and it probably is least productive. Certainly is least productive as a North Melbourne player. So yeah, I gave him a 2. None of his games really showed significant promise for the future, and similar to Flynn Perez, I've just got the sense that it was a bit of a last chance to show something. Not a case of trying to develop him. He just hasn't come on, and yeah, I'd expect that he'll be getting delisted, I would think. Aiden Bonner, pretty similar, actually. Only played in rounds 1 and 4 when we were very short for key defensive options. was really outplayed in round 4 against the Blues, albeit we had no Logue or Mackay for that game, so Bonner and Core were tasked with doing all the defending. Similar to Kallan Dawson, it's kind of hard to judge him based on his limited VFL form. He did have some injuries too, but defenders are always harder to evaluate when you're not watching them because the stats don't tell the whole story. He's never played more than 10 games in a season, and I think that's worth noting. He's just that player on the fringe. 2 this year, 10 last year, 10 the year before, 6 before that, and then he played 2 and 4 in his 2 seasons at the Giants. He was actually there as a midfielder, so he has changed into that defender at North, but yeah, it's just hard to see him getting better. He's really not big enough to play on the bigs, and then when he plays on the smalls, he's a bit slow. At 24, he should be coming into his best footy, but injuries and form have made it challenging for him. So I've given him a 1. Like Lockie Young, seems unlikely for a contract next year. 6 years in the system, 4 on our list, and he hasn't been able to lock down a spot. And we've needed defensive players over the past couple of years, and the fact that he has come in and not been able to do the job is a problem. He's not strong enough in that one-on-one contest against any type of player, really. So, yeah, unfortunately, not a great season again for Aidan Bonner. 15, Daniel Howe. We love a whipping boy. Played 11 games, averaged 14.5 disposals, 3.6 marks, 2.2 tackles, 1.5 clearances, kicked 2 goals for the year. A couple of those games were as the sub, and it was an up and down year. I think played an extended stretch at the start of the year and then played a couple late. He's just that classic depth player. He can find the footy because he had 5 games with 18 or more touches, but very prone to a clanger. I think we all remember that kick backwards against the Tigers that almost directly went to, I think it was Prestia. That resulted in an avalanche of Richmond goals. That kind of sums up his year and how I think North Melbourne fans felt about him. He knew where the footy was. It was just you were nervous every time he had it. And I think if we were winning games, it'd be a lot easier to tolerate some of those brain fades. But yeah, I've found him really hard to take this year, and it was just the 1 year that he's been on the list, whereas at least some other whipping boys have been around for longer, and they kind of, that tension builds. Clarko must see something in him because he's played 8 years the Hawks, and then he's come across the Roos. He's spent a long time on AFL lists. Only 107 games in that time, so he is an in and out sort of player, but yeah, just not the sort of player that I think we needed, given his ability. But I also understand that's really hard to find ready-made 27-year-olds that can get the job done. Gave his year a 2, coming across as that mature seasoned player with 100-odd games of experience. We needed more, but he's going to be 28 when the season rolls around next year. I think it's really challenging to play underperforming players at that age group. So I'm hoping that if he is retained for next year, that we don't see too much of him. He just doesn't play the game fast enough or with enough skill and wit. He knows how to find the footy, and that's really what he does best. And I think the game is, generally speaking, moving past those sorts of players. You've got to be quick-witted, and you've got to have some significant skills to get a game. And I mean, yeah, that's why Daniel Howe's gotten a 2. Liam Shields, so the other Hawthorn recruit, or ex-Hawthorn recruit, conversely to Howe, came across the Hawks and played his role, 16 games, averaged 17.7 disposals, 4.1 marks, 5.5 tackles, 2.6 clearances, kicked 3 goals, mostly in a wing and a midfield role, and was just consistent. Gave effort every week. You knew what you were going to get from him. He did have a couple of niggles that kept him out. Obviously, with the 16 games, he would have played pretty much every week if he was fit. 8 times, had 6 or more tackles, and just didn't make mistakes. He wasn't prone to those brain fades that we saw from some of our other senior players. Yeah, just exactly the sort of mature, cool head, led by example. We really needed him. Had a couple of standout high 20s possession games and was otherwise good for tackling and just being error-free. So I gave him a 6. did what we needed, earned himself a contract for next year, should be going around, and maybe that becomes similar to Hugh Greenwood, like a 10 to 12 games next year, and he's getting pushed out of the side. But if not, then I'm sure he'll play some reliable minutes for us. So yeah, a good solid season from Shields, and certainly got a lot more out of him than we did Daniel Howe. Another recruit that came across last trade period, Darcy Tucker. 18 games, averaged 16.3 disposals, 4.2 marks, 1.6 tackles, about a clearance a game, kicked 6 goals. And it was an up and down year for Darcy. Came in round 3 and then played most of the year, had a couple of in and outs, but a really hard year to evaluate. He's now played 126 games, and at 26 years old, he's like Daniel Howe. He should be in his prime, and that's the prime. I do wonder what we got him across for. I think at the end of the day, we got him with Logue for not a lot. We got the two of them for essentially a second round and a third round pick. So if you want to call Logue the second round pick and Tucker the third round pick, I mean, sure, it doesn't quite work like that. But if you think about the fact that we got him as a third round pick, it makes sense. But it also makes sense it shows that Freo potentially didn't value him super highly. Because, he more or less hit his career averages this year. So this is probably who he is, I think. His last 5 or 6 games were a bit questionable. I thought he was lucky to retain his place in the side. I mean, probably not the last round with so many players out injured, but prior to that, I was certainly expecting that he might have been dropped or played as the sub, and it didn't happen. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he can bring for us next year. If he's able to settle on a wing or at half back, I could see him playing best 22 footy, but I just don't think actual inside midfield time is going to come for him, particularly given his skill set. He just often was caught holding the ball trying to do too much, and he's an average kick. Like, not a bad kick, but not a great kick. So I'd love to see him add some tackling to his game. That 1.5 tackles probably isn't enough for someone playing through the midfield. And he was a tackler earlier in his career. When I looked at his averages, he was tackling a fair bit in his early years at Freo. It's sort of gone away from his game. I'm not sure if that's due to his injuries or just where he's been played, but he certainly needs to get that back in his game, because we know that we need to be putting pressure through that midfield. That's been one of our issues this year, is our midfield hasn't defended super well. I gave him a 4, and that really reflects. I think it was a slightly disappointing year for him. Other players got 4s for lack of opportunity or injury, but his was just due to inconsistency. He's going to need to work on that to keep his place in the side for next year, because we know we're hoping to bring in some new young talent, and someone like Wardlaw will hopefully play most of the year. So I think that's going to make it interesting to see if Darcy Tucker can hold his spot, because he didn't blow me away this year. And now we get to our 2 captains. Jai Simpkins up first. Missed the 5 games with a hand issue and some concussion problems, and was a bit down on form from the previous 2 seasons in which he won the Sid Barker medal. You could argue last year he was lucky to win it, but certainly 2021 he had a fantastic year, and he didn't quite reach those heights this year. Averaged 20.7 disposals, 2.7 marks, 3.9 tackles, 4.2 clearances, kicked the 9 goals. He was good without being great this year. He was a bit of a victim of the levels that he's set in the last couple of years for himself. I do wonder if taking on the captaincy this year might have had an impact on him. Like, it's impossible to know from the outside, but there are a lot of extra responsibilities and things that come with being the captain, so potentially that's weighed on him. He wasn't able to hit 30 disposals at any point this year, which is kind of reflective of that fact that he wasn't able to hit the highs of the last couple of years. He did have 28 and 27 a couple of times, so he was... It wasn't a bad year, but he just wasn't hitting the heights that we've seen him hit. He was generally good for a kind of low 20s disposal games, and always good for a couple of clearances and tackles. So couldn't fault his effort. Had his moments. I thought in that Swansea game, he really got us going with a goal after we looked really flat. And his capacity to put a step on someone and break someone's ankles is still elite. So he still has that capacity. On the flip side, a couple of times he tried to fly the flag for his teammates or get in opponents' faces, and he just found the line and stepped over it a couple of times, gave away a couple of needless free kicks and 50s. So just needs to work on finding that middle ground as a leader. It's a nitpick. It's not a big deal, but it's something that I do think he needs to work on, because he walks that line, and I think he does need to work on that. I gave him a 5. I think his 10th place in the Sid Barker medal kind of tells a story. It was a so-so year for him. Some of that out of his control and some of it in it. But love his commitment to the club long term, and hopefully he can get back closer to his 2021 or 2022 form for next year. In terms of our other co-captain, Luke McDonald, played every game except for the last one, tore his hamstring in that penultimate game. His disposal and his ability to make quick decisions has never been a strength, and I think at times this year he made it really difficult to defend him as a player. He had to be on the verge of being dropped several times, and I wonder if he wasn't a co-captain, whether he might have been. His numbers don't really tell the whole story. So 17.4 disposals, 5.4 marks, 3.6 tackles. And yeah, I mean, as I say, he tackled well. He intercepted relatively well at times, but I mean, how many times did we see him take possession, not get rid of it right away, and then just sort of hold the ball in and hope the umpire didn't pay a holding the ball against him? It's a classic Luke McDonald move. Part of that must be the instructions that he's under, but it's also, I think, his lack of ability to get off a quick disposal effectively. It's almost like he knows he can't do that, so he'd prefer to... It's self-preservation, I guess. He was also exploited by opposition players too often. He doesn't really have the physical attributes that allow him to win one-on-ones. We saw both smaller and taller players get a hold of him at times this year, and whilst he does rebound the ball, you'd love to see him locking down a bit more. On the other hand, you can see his leadership with younger players is great, and he is more outspoken than Jai. He does the media, I think, a bit better than Jai does. I think even if their form was questionable at times this year, their strengths as leaders were complementary, and I think McDonald did a good job of on-field and off-field leadership from what I could see. He was always the first one to be sort of getting around the younger players, or walking around a player taking a shot for goal and just having a quiet word in their ear. So there's plenty of good there, but he needs to play better footy next year if he remains as a co-captain. I gave him a 4. Disappointing year on field, and lots to think about with where and how he plays next year. I think he kind of has to be a relatively loose option in defence, or we need to find another role for him to play. He reads the ball well, but just lacks in disposal, and hopefully he can turn the form around next year and have a fantastic year, but it wasn't a great year from him. So 4 for Luke McDonald. Last 10, Ben Cunnington. Cunners could be the last time we're kind of talking about him like this. Just the 9 games for the year. Unfortunately, the last sort of 3 years, he's really been ruined by injury, and obviously he's had that cancer battle. So it's been a tough 3 or 4 years for Ben. Played 9 this year, 2 the year before, 15 the year before that. That was his fantastic nearly Zed Barker from 15 games, and then in 2020 just the 3. So he struggled to get on the park, unfortunately, and really lost some fitness. He was down on all his averages this year, and that's why he wasn't able to get back into the team, except for his farewell game in round 22. Played the first 8 games and had some good in there, but just lost that running capacity. I mean, it's never been a strength of his, and he really struggled to cover the ground and just defend, to be honest. So I think the injuries, and particularly sort of going through chemotherapy and the cancer battles, really worn away at his fitness and his strength. So he really struggled to get back to that kind of form that he's had. I mean, highlight of his year was definitely that farewell game against Essendon. Kicked the 2 goals, had 24 touches, 3 tackles, 10 clearances. He nearly single-handedly got us across the line in that game, and that was one of the best sort of farewells I've seen, given the match ended up being a loss. He had a year to go on his contract, so I think both he and the club knew that his time was up, and it was best that we parted ways. And yeah, I mean, I don't need to say too much more about Ben, I think, other than what I said in my farewell podcast about him. So if you do want to hear me gush about Cunners, then feel free to go back a couple of weeks and find that podcast I did about Cunners, because it's going to be a shame. It's going to be a very different look to our side not seeing that fend off in the next couple of years. I gave him a 4. Probably seems harsh. We don't want to be harsh on Cunners, but he was only okay in the games he played. I think if we were challenging for finals, we might have persisted with him more, but we're not. So still a feel-good ending to his career that he was able to kind of do it on his own terms. And obviously we'd hoped for more for him. We'd hoped to get another year out of him, but he just wasn't up to it. And I think it's through no fault of his own. He's been through a lot. So a 4 for Cunners, but we love you, Cunners. Luke Davies Uniacke, LDU, backed up his breakout 2022 year, albeit he was a little bit interrupted by injuries this year, but gee, he was good this year when he did play. 27.4 disposals, 13.2 contested possessions, 3.7 marks, 4.5 tackles, 6.7 clearances, 5 inside 50s, kicked 8 goals. All of that just from the 14 matches. As I mentioned earlier, finished 4th in the Sid Barker medal. So doing that whilst missing 9 games is quite the effort. And you have to think if we'd had him and Taron Thomas playing more games together, I think we win a couple more. They only played 7 games at the same time this year. Just showing that he can be an absolutely gun midfielder if he stays fit. Had some huge games, 5 games where he hit 30 plus disposals. He easily could be on 4 or 6, somewhere between 4 and 6 Brownlow votes after round 2, because those first 2 games that he played were elite. He hit 30 or more in both of those. If I had to nitpick, sometimes he tries to do a little bit too much and he gets caught or he has to retreat, but I think getting more quality around him will reduce that, and hopefully that can improve over the next couple of years as he's continuing into his prime. But yeah, I mean, LDU he's shown that he's going to be a key cog of our midfield moving forward, and yeah, fantastic year. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning with him is it's just a reminder that these high picks can take some time. He was a 2017 draft player and really, cemented his spot in the side 2021, became a star in 2022. So it does take 4 or 5 years sometimes, even if they're a midfielder. So I just think that's worth remembering as we go into these drafts. I gave LDU an 8, but yeah, he's only down those 2 points due to his missed footy. A superb year when fit and was consistently our most damaging midfielder when he was playing. And yeah, just a far cry from when he was being wasted at full forward a couple of years ago. I remember watching him, must have been probably 2021 if I had to guess, sitting there watching him at full forward just going, what are we doing with you here? Anyway, he's a midfielder through and through, and it's fantastic to see the form that he's been in the last few years. Another fantastic player, number 8, Bailey Scott. Just an elite year on the wing and off half-back. Averaged 22.1 touches, 5.5 marks, 2.6 tackles, 1.5 clearances, 3.5 inside 50s, 3.7 rebound 50s, kicked 5 goals. You can tell the amount of stats that I was listing there. He's just that versatile, does a little bit of everything, but plays that wing role really well. Had a breakout year last year and was super, super consistent again this year. I think he took it up another level. Played in every game, had 30 or more disposals 5 times, and only had less than 17 disposals 4 times. Just reads the play really well, knows where to run to, and can run all day. You can lock him into a wing or a halfback role for many years to come. You know what you're going to get from him 9 times out of 10. Yeah, he was just a meters gained machine, often tasked with running it running with the ball for 15 meters before kicking it 50 meters down the wing. He was a little error prone in the early weeks of the year, but once he got going, I think, yeah, he was probably our most consistent player in terms of getting on the park and also playing. And yeah, I mean, twice in a row now he's been 3rd in the Sid Barker medal, so it shows that internally his consistency is being valued really highly and he's doing what he's been asked to do, which I think makes sense. I gave him a 9, sort of, has to be a 9. Had that slightly slower start to the year, and he's not a match winner, but not everyone in the team has to be a match winner. You do need those players that are consistent, reliable, you know what they do each week, and can win the ball. And yeah, I mean, he became a real accumulator of the footy this year. He had 5.5, or averaged 5.5 more disposals than he has in his career this year. So a big improvement on his capacity to find the ball. Jack Zeeble, number 7, the former captain, averaged 22.2 disposals, 6.8 marks, nearly 2 tackles, 6 rebound 50s, 2.9 1 percenters. Played nearly every game, just missed that last round after he retired after the Richmond game. Played as sub several times late in the year, and yeah, we just got him to the line. He probably could have gone around next year, to be honest, but I think he's timed it perfectly. He hasn't left it too late. Was a reliable defensive presence this year. Still read the play really well, impacted contests and intercepted really well. It was just that those clangers that he was kind of prone to, made several costly errors in big moments, and that has to impact how we all felt about him as fans. We all remember those ones that he kicked out of bounds in the first game against Essendon, but he had a few where I just went, what are you doing, mate? Like, just walk that one out of bounds. You know what's going to happen. A really paradoxical player. Accumulated off halfback, generally did his job, but just didn't have the skills to get the game going off halfback consistently enough. And yeah, I think a big part of the reason that he continued playing was having him as a leader there to help and guide Simpkin and McDonald through their first year, and also having a leader in our defence, because that was where the ball was spending a lot of time. His little mini specky in his last game really summed up his year. He did something fantastic, then he tried to do the right thing. He kicked it inboard, turned it over, and the Tigers kicked a goal. And yeah, I think that really symbolises the kind of year that he had. I gave Zeebs a 5. Much better suited down back to the forward role that he had last year. A really flexible option who could go okay on most types of players, but I think what we're going to miss most next year is his leadership, not necessarily his footy. Number 6, George Wardlaw. Big raps on him coming in, but only managed the 8 games, all due to injury concerns. He debuted against the Swans and played a couple of games there, and then had some hamstring tightness and a strain late in the year, so just ended on the 8 games. He was also clearly on minutes restrictions when he was playing, so he had some brilliant moments, but he wasn't able to have that real accumulation or domination of a game just based on the fact that he played 8 games, and also he wasn't getting heaps of minutes. His tackling and clearance work was phenomenal for a first-year midfielder. He averaged 4.1 clearances and 5.8 tackles. And three of his games, he had 9 tackles. So really attacks the contest, really attacks the footy. Just so agile and capable of biting off some of those tricky kicks as well. The worry about him is not going to be his ability, but his health, particularly with his hamstrings and his hips. So yeah, I mean, we just have to trust the medical team's going to get him right. We have had a couple of players where this could go either way, like Taylor Garner comes to mind as someone where we just weren't able to get him on the park for long enough, whereas Robbie Tarrant, completely different player obviously, but eventually we were able to get the best out of him, so hopefully he falls more into the Robbie Tarrant camp and we can keep him on the park. I gave Wardlaw a 5, heaps of promise, obviously he needs to stay on the park and hopefully play maybe 20-odd games next year. And if we can get the ruck right, the ball should be coming out of the middle beautifully with Wardlaw and Thomas and LDU working together at times alongside some others. Yeah, I thought it was a pass mark for Wardlaw given what he came into the year with, but hoping for a lot more next year. The last 5 players, Curtis Taylor, 16 games, dropped after the Port Adelaide game in round 8 and couldn't get back in until round 18 against the Hawks. Played a ripper game upon his return and was good against Melbourne too, but I think next year looms as a massive year for him. just in terms of what he looks like long term. He averaged 13.8 disposals, 4.8 marks, 1.9 tackles, kicked 9 goals. But yeah, that high half forward role is going to be a watch because we've got several players capable of playing it. We know that Stevenson plays that at times, Eddie Ford plays that at times, Zerha can be a higher half forward. I'm just not sure who's going to have that role long term. He was a lock, Curtis Taylor, in 2021 and 2022, but not this year. So you do wonder if the patience with him is running thin. At his best, he's a workhorse. He's a really strong marking option for his size. He's a great outlet on the wing and at a half back at times, but it's just whether or not his disposal is good enough and whether or not he finds enough of the footy in the right places, because he's clearly got talent. I'm just not sure which way it's going to go. He's had 5 years on the list. He's one of those players where the development's a bit of a question mark lately. I gave him a 4. His form fluctuated, and aside from his fantastic performance against the Hawks when he returned, I'm just not sure that he had another standout match this year. So competition for his spot is really going to spark him next year. It seemed to spark him this year. We've got to hope for a similar result for next year. But yeah, 4 for Curtis Taylor. Aiden Core, everyone's favourite player. A bit of a strange one for Core. He missed round 1. He was in and out a little bit. He was played as the sub at one point, which raised some eyebrows. He just never really felt settled in the team until Griffin Logue went down. I think we all thought, oh golly, if Logue's gone down, what's our defence going to look like? And Core really stepped up. Had a great year after that. I feel like his spot was cemented. He was actually our best one-on-one defender this year. He only lost 20% of the contests that he was involved in when it was one-on-one, which is a fantastic result. And I think it's one of those ones where the eye test sometimes makes him look worse than he was, because as I say, he was our number one 1v1 defender. I also like that we saw some of his attacking flair. We all remember when he put on that step on a player in the back pocket and broke their ankles. Showed some great strength. He ran through Brad Hill and put him in hospital, sent him into next week. I think so long as he's not playing on those monster key forwards, he's absolutely up to it. And I think this was, it's his third year at North, and given the first year was a wipeout with his injuries, this is definitely the best year he's had. Similar to Kane Turner, he's a bit of a whipping boy, but I think he's won some people over with the second half of his year. So at 29, he's still got plenty of good footy left in him. It's just whether or not he can replicate that sort of last eight or so games from this year. I gave him a 6. He showed something that we didn't know that he had, but his start to the year wasn't fantastic. So I think he's a classic. He's never as good or as bad as you think. It's a promising year for him, knowing that we've got Logues to think about next year. But yeah, I don't want to overhype him, given that it did take him a while to get going, and it's his third year on the list. Last 3, Harry Sheezel. I mean, what can you say? Averaged 27 disposals, 5.4 marks, 2.9 tackles, 440 metres gained, 5.2 rebound 50s, 2.9 inside 50s, kicked the 3 goals, won the best and fairest, won the Rising Star, had the most possessions ever from a first-year player. Like, you name it, he did it. And all in an unfamiliar role in defence. Like, he'd never played as a defender until this year. So, yeah, simply remarkable. Had 12 games with 30 or more disposals. Only 3 times did he have less than 22. Just reads the play so well. He's clean. He stands out in a defence that was severely lacking that kind of class. And yeah, I mean, as I say, what can I say? His toe poke really won us the game in round 2 against Freo. He nearly got us the win against the Swans with those 2 goals that he kicked. Tried to drag us across the line against the Eagles in Perth. Yeah, just phenomenal. It's easy to say that sort of half-back role is easy to play, but his play in the forward line in the middle was also elite. He played a bit there, and he's a prodigious talent. So an easy 10, not even worth discussing. Best first-year player I've seen for North in my time, easily, and can't wait to see what he can do in the next couple of years. Jaden Stevenson, bit of an interesting year. His first 10 or so games were really consistent, and I think what we saw is that he plays much better under Clarko. He seems to have a great relationship with him because, yeah, his last couple of games were good, and his first block was great, but the middle he sort of went a bit missing, playing under Rats. 26 goals for the year, average 10.8 disposals, 3.6 marks, 2 tackles. Just want to see him in the high teens for disposal a bit more often, instead of that 8 or 9 disposal mark that he hit often this year. It was certainly his best year at North Melbourne, but that first year at Collingwood he kicked 38 goals, so not quite up to those heights. Kicked 2 or more goals 9 times this year, but was also held goalless 8 times. So I think that's that inconsistency that through the middle part of the year he had problems with. I'd love him to be a 40 goal a year player, but I also want to see him get a bit more involved in the general play. So we know that he can transition the ball a little bit. We saw him do that at times last year when he was being experimented with. I'm not advocating us play him in defence. All I mean is I'd love to see him running through the middle of the ground a little bit more. So, yeah, I gave him a 5. It was certainly an improvement from his previous 2 years at North, but the second half of the year he faded a little. I would have certainly had him higher at the start of the year. You'd just love to see him become a sort of 16 disposal, 2 goals, 3 tackles per game kind of player. And I think he took a step towards that this year. So a 5 for Jaden. And the last player, Jack Marnie, should be a quick one. Fitting way to end it with another whipping boy. Came in round 8 against the Saints, and yeah, he'd been out of favour to start the year and played actually not too bad in that game, in that high half forward kind of wing role. Certainly was, in the frame to play a couple more games. Played against Porton, dislocated his shoulder, and that was it. So, yeah, just the 2 games. Just not sure that he has the physical attributes for it at AFL level. His 44 career games have netted him 18 goals, and the bloke literally struggles to kick at 40 metres. I don't understand, where he's at physically. I did see a bit of promise in him in 2021, but his VFL form this year was average. His AFL form was fine in his 2 games, but nothing that made me go, great, I can't wait to get him back. I think much like Perez and Young, we might have seen the last of him, and we know we've got medium small forwards. They're plentiful. It's just whether or not the medium smalls are up to it, and I'm not sure that Marnie is. So I've given him a 1. Two games wasn't much to judge him off, but as I said, his VFL form wasn't it. So yeah, unfortunate he got injured, but that's footy. So that is all 46 players on the list. A lot of prep time went into that. I hope that it was somewhat enjoyable or, somewhat useful to listen to. I'll just do a quick run through now of everyone now that I've done the entire list. So I did not rate Braden George. He got an NA. The only player to get a 0 was Jacob Edwards. Showed nothing. 1s were Aidan Bonner and Jack Marnie. 2 were Hamish Free, Flynn Perez, Robert Hanson Jr., Phoenix Spicer, Lockie Young, and Daniel Howe. And I think, looking at those 0s, 1s, and 2s, you can see most of those are the ones that you'd expect to be coming off the list. So, makes sense. 3, Kallan Dawson, Blake Drury, Cooper Harvey, Charles Lazaro, Jackson Archer, and Kane Turner. 4, Aaron Hall, Tristan Cherry, Josh Goda, Charlie Comben, Callum Coleman-Jones, Hugh Greenwood, Darcy Tucker, Luke McDonald, Ben Cunnington, Curtis Taylor. So a lot of players in that 4 bracket that were just a little bit disappointing, a little bit down, or didn't get on the park enough. 5, Will Phillips, Miller Bergman, Paul Curtis, Tom Powell, Todd Goldstein, Jai Simpkin, Jack Zeeble, George Wardlaw, and Jaden Stevenson. 6, Cam Zerha, Eddie Ford, Ben Mackay, Griffin Logue, Liam Shields, Aidan Core. And then our really well-performing players this year: 7, Taron Thomas, 8, Luke Davies-Uniacke, 9, Bailey Scott, and 10, Nick Larkey and Harry Sheasel. So would love your thoughts on how I've evaluated all of these players. I will put up something on social media where we can have a bit of a debate about what we thought. But it was a really interesting process to go through, and in some ways eye-opening just to see how many of those players I would be saying failed the year. Really makes you reflect and go, well, this is why. We're in second last place, and we've been second last or last the past 4 years. We've just got too many of these players underperforming and not enough stars, or not enough players playing to a star level. So that brings to an end the season review. We'll see how we go for a podcast next week. I think the next pod is going to be a bit of a list evaluation and what are we thinking we need going into the trade period. We'll see how we go, but yeah, should speak to you in a week or so. Yeah, let's see who's into the grand final. I'm hoping for a GWS Brisbane final, but I would also love to see Carlton Collingwood. I don't really mind at this point. Collingwood's the only side that I wouldn't want to win. But yeah, in order, I'd say I'm going for GWS, then Brisbane, then Carlton, then the Pies. I've rambled long enough. Have a great week. Speak to you soon. And as always, go North, go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. Please subscribe to the podcast on your app and give me a rating or a review if you can. I'd really appreciate it. You can find me on all social media at NorthPod Show. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Threads, you name it, I'm there. I'll see you next episode.